Children in the United States didn't always have the rights that they enjoyed today. There was a time when instead of running through playgrounds, kids were shuffled into sweatshops, and rather than learning multiplication and literature, they learned to operate factory machinery. The children's rights movement changed all that. In 1790, Englishman Samuel Slater brought his cotton mill technology to the United States, kicking off what we refer to as the Industrial Revolution. Developments in production and transportation gave way to a mass migration from agrarian towns into urban cities, as farmers and their families looked for work in the newly developed factories and mines. Although children had been servants and apprentices throughout most of human history, child labor reached new extremes during the Industrial Revolution. Factory owners sought to employ children because they could pay lower wages, were easier to control, more submissive to punishment, and could fit into smaller spaces, allowing them to unjam machines. Factories and mines were dangerous places for children to work, with little to no safety regulation or cap on hours, due to the government's laissez-faire, hands-off policy. By the early 1900s, progressive-era reformers saw the harmful effects of factory life for children and worked to bring about many reforms. This is how the children's rights movement came to be. Child labor was a form of enslavement that had to be stopped. This movement set goals to end the separation of children from their families, end exposure to serious hazards and illnesses, and end the deprivation of childhood education. Activists in this movement were working to decrease the need for child labor. This movement became increasingly successful as its activists worked for reformation through their state legislatures, which resulted in many laws being passed. As children have historically been viewed as a woman's domain, it is unsurprising that women have always been at the forefront of the children's rights movement. It was women who first asserted that children have rights and deserve protection from the capitalistic exploitation. It was a force of brave women who worked tirelessly for raising awareness of the needs for protecting children from coercion into harsh labor rather than being nurtured into intelligent individuals. Every man and woman who grew up attending school rather than slaving away in a sweatshop can trace this privilege to the good brought about by the children's rights movement. Florence Kelley was one among many important women at the heart of the children's rights movement. She was born on September 12, 1859 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her father, William Darrah Kelley, a U.S. congressman and firm abolitionist, proved to be an important influence on the young Florence. Feeling it important that his daughter understand the situations of children less fortunate than she, he toured her through steel and glass factories. The images of young children working heavy machinery under dangerous conditions would forever stay with her. As she grew into her adult years, the memory of those visits influenced her decision to turn towards advocacy for child labor reform. She was called by her colleagues the toughest customer in the reform riot, the finest rough-and-tumble fighter for the good life of others that they ever knew. In 1891, Kelley left New York for Chicago, where she joined Jane Addams, Julia Lathrop, Ellen Gates Starr, and other women at Hull House, a social settlement house where she lived from 1891 to 1899. At Hull House, ambitious women worked to change the living and working conditions for people who worked and lived in the sweatshops and tenements nearby. Kelley's first job after coming to the Hull House settlement was to survey the working conditions in local factories. She took the initiative by taking state legislatures on tours, where she found children as young as 3 or 4 working in the factories. The report of this survey, along with other studies, was presented, resulting in the Illinois state legislature bringing about the first factory law that prohibited employment of children under age 14. Kelley was subsequently appointed the first woman factory inspector with the task of monitoring the application of this law. To advance her credibility as an inspector, Kelley enrolled to study at Northwestern University, graduating in 1894, and was successfully admitted to the bar. In 1899, Florence Kelley moved to New York City to become the general secretary of the new National Consumers League, where she would soon move on to become the acting head. In 1902, Kelley joined with Lillian Wald, the founder of Henry Street Settlement, to influence the Association of Neighborhood Workers to appoint a child labor committee to investigate the problem of child labor in New York. In November 1902, this committee was organized as the New York Child Labor Committee. In 1903, Kelley gave an address at the National Conference of Charities and Corrections, the social and medical aspects of child labor. In 1904, Kelley was one of 15 leaders to form the National Committee for Child Labor. The NCLC carried out investigations of child labor and studied existing laws and statutes of regulation and enforcement governing child labor, none of which were seen as to meet a minimum. Committees that were organized fought for tougher state and federal laws against the abuses of industrial child labor. Leaders behind this movement were very resilient and did not give up, even when things were slow-moving. Other tactics were using mass political action, including expert investigation, photography, pamphlets, leaflets, mass mailings, and lobbying. One important initiative of the NCLC was the introduction of the white label. Employers who met the standard of the NCLC, by utilizing the labor law and keeping the safety standards, had the right to display the white label. In 1905, Kelly, together with Upton Sinclair and Jack London, started the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, in which she gave a series of public lectures in numerous American universities on improving the conditions of labor. In 1916, Kelly and other members of the NCLC lobbied Congress to pass the first major piece of legislation to combat child labor. The Keating-Owen Child Labor Act of 1916 banned the sale of any product made by children under a certain age. For everyone else, no products could be sold from a place where children under 16 worked nights or more than 8 hours a day. The act passed and was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson, but was declared unconstitutional in 1918 by the Supreme Court in the case of Hammer v. Dagenhart. Florence Kelley was a woman of great bravery and commitment to justice who inspired others to follow similar paths. Her long fight to ban child labor finally resulted in Congress passing the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, a United States labor law that creates the right to a minimum wage and a time-and-a-half overtime pay when people work over 40 hours a week. It also prohibited most employment of minors in oppressive child labor. Due to the work of people like Florence Kelley, children in the United States have a right to an education and freedom from oppressive child labor. But the struggle is far from over. While child labor is banned, there is still much work to do to guarantee that every child in our country receives a quality education. There is even more need for advocacy overseas, where children continue to be denied education and forced into labor. But the future looks bright. Brave reformers like the ones who have gone before continue to fight the cause in children's rights.